Good afternoon. My name is Rob Gonzalez from California Baptist University, and today I'll be presenting my study titled Primary Language and English Test Scores. In this research, we will examine how students' primary language affects their performance on English tests using data from a large public high school in Los Angeles County as part of an accreditation study. So without much further ado, let's get started. In our study, we sought to answer the following questions. Do students whose primary language is English score higher on English test scores compared to students whose primary language is not English? The importance of this question lies in its potential to identify which students may need additional support and resource allocation to improve their English test performance. To test this research question, we set up the following hypothesis. Our null hypothesis is that there's no significant difference in the mean English test scores among students whose primary language is English, Spanish, and other. Our alternative hypothesis is that at least one group's mean English test score significantly differs from the others. Using these hypotheses will help us explore which differences exist across the three languages in an omnibus test. Prior to conducting further statistical analysis, we first focus on descriptive statistics of the dataset. Our dataset included 1,833 participants, and of these participants, they had interesting demographics characteristics. Firstly, in terms of sex, we saw that the dataset was evenly distributed among female and male. Additionally, in terms of primary language, we saw that most respondents in this dataset are Spanish primary language speakers. Additionally, in terms of the grades that were included in this dataset, we saw that there's more respondents that are 10th graders in this dataset. And then finally, in terms of U.S. birth, we saw that most of the respondents of this dataset were U.S. born students. Descriptive statistics were ran through SPSS, and these were some of the findings that we found. So as you could see in these tables, we see the statistics for sex, grade, U.S. born, and primary language, and the associated means for these descriptive statistics. Additionally, we see a table that demonstrates U.S. born statistics, and then finally we see a bar chart that demonstrates the distribution between female and male students. Since we are comparing the means of English test scores across three independent groups defined by primary language, we employed a one-way NOVA test. This test is ideal because it allows us to assess whether there are overall differences in test scores among the groups before diving into which specific group differs the most. We conducted our test using SPSS and found the following outputs. In terms of between groups, there is a degree of freedom of 2, and within groups, there is a degree of freedom of 1,120. Additionally, the F statistic is 13.493 with a significance of less than 0.001. Additionally, our eta square is 0.022. Additionally, we conducted a Bonferroni test for our data set and also conducted descriptives for each one of our dependent variables. The results from the one-way ANOVA is that primary language affects English test scores. Our analysis yielded an F statistic of 13.493 with degrees of freedom 2 and 1,220 and a p-value below 0.001, which is under our 0.05 threshold for statistical significance. This means that we reject the null hypothesis that there is no difference among the three groups that were observed in this data set. We also looked at the effect size with an eta square of 0.022, indicating that about 2% of the variance in English test scores can be explained by primary language. Next, we performed a post hoc test using the Buffaroni correction, and these tests revealed that each group, English, Spanish, and other, had significantly different mean scores. To gauge the practical significance, we also calculated the Cohen's d for each pairwise comparison. The differences between English and Spanish was small, with a d score of 0.08, whereas the differences between English and other speakers were moderate, with a d score of 0.56. Finally, the difference between Spanish and other was also moderate, with a d score of 0.68. Overall, the results suggest that while English and Spanish are fairly similar in their scores, the other language group scores notably higher on average. In summary, this study demonstrated that the student's primary language has a significant impact on their English test scores. Specifically, students classified under the other primary language group scored higher on average than those whose primary language is English or Spanish. Based on these results, I recommend further research to identify the teaching practices that contributed to higher performance observed in other primary language groups. By understanding these practices, educators can potentially replicate them and enhance English test scores across other groups. That concludes my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention and have a great day.